So I'm going to wrap around to what you asked earlier. If it were more accurate, is it racist? And this is specifically with the witch doctor that I want to touch on, because she makes this as an example of more exoticism. So if you have you both of you have played Diablo 3? I know you have, Derek,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
Okay.
I played a monk for a little while,
Okay.
but that's about it.
But you've seen the witch doctor, haven't you? Like you know
Yeah,
what it looks like.
there were
Okay.
spiders.
Yeah, those spiders in jars
Yep.
and yeah.
Free
Um
spiders all day long.
So
Hmm.
this is one thing where I don't agree with her because I looked up, I was like, Witch Doctor Africa or whatever, just to see what they look like. And the Witch Doctor is the closest thing to a source material than the other two examples she gave. And this is where I was like, well, this is okay. Like I have no problem with this. Like this it's a little they throw a little like pizzazz or fantasy in there. Okay, sure, fine, but um and the witch doctor is an odd edge case because if that witch doctor class were white, she would yell about cultural appropriation. If the witch
Yep.
doctor were black, she would argue that the representation is being racist. So you can't have it both ways at this
I
point.
Yeah,
think
you
I
can't
think the
win.
third option
Yeah.
is again mine. I think 'cause I'm with you. Like that is like frankly to a certain extent, a witch doctor that is accurate to the real life example, but then again, real life example is vague and
It's
stuff. But
right.
I mean, so a witch doctor is always a trope. It is a trope.
Correct.
Um, but for me, the thing that would again make it okay is if that weren't the only black characters in the game.
It's not because Tyrael, well, granted he's a fallen angel, Tyrael represents an African American male. He's
Hmm.
the angel in
Oh, right. When he went
yeah.
human mode,
Yeah,
I
when he went in
forgot
human
about
mode.
that.
Yeah,
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 I was
yeah.
like, he doesn't have a face. How do you like
Well,
he's
because
black?
well,
Like,
not
no,
the
there
color,
oh,
right?
wait, yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
In Reaper
I
Souls,
okay.
don't know.
he became a human.
I
Yeah,
don't
I forgot
think
about
I
that.
agree with that whatsoever, though, because I feel like if a character is racist, it's racist independent of how many non-racist stereotypes there are in the game. Like, if
Oh,
you
yeah, well,
have one white person and it is that stereotype I just said, I don't think that would change how that stereotype is a stereotype if you have a non-stereotype in there. I don't think you get brownie points for that.
hmm
Like, if we're going to
It's
say that it is bad when it's standalone, it should be bad regardless of how many other characters are there. If we're saying that, like, it's okay because you're representing other things and therefore you're putting it into a context, I don't think that needs to go with saying. I think most people can just go, yes, this is a stereotype. This is not indicative of all people. In the same way that you don't do it to, like, Gears of War characters. Like, all of those guys wear all the same clothes, all the same uniform, and
hmm
they have different personalities. Coltrane's the motherfucking Coltrane because he's Coltrane. I don't need him to wear like his murder ball outfit or whatever for his personality to shine through. And you could also say he's a stereotype because he's a loud black guy. And, loud black people, that's a stereotype. But we don't need to have like three other black guys in Gears of War in order for us to justify that.
Right.
On top of that, you could you end up with problems with representation where it's like, okay, this thing is completely representative of this demographic. But how do you represent a demographic? That is a stereotype. If you're trying to encompass a whole group of people into a person, by nature, you're generalizing.
I
So,
would agree.
in order to avoid this, you're going to have to, like, you mandate having to have multiple characters so that you can flesh out this demographic. And I think that's just a slippery slope. You're then saying that you could never have a truly representative character because if it is representative, then it's a stereotype. And if it isn't representative, then you aren't like representing. You would have to do something like basically take the stereotype of a white person and then paint them black. And then somebody will just get upset over that because then you're not doing black people justice.
Right.
So I feel like
I'm
that's
not saying that a game should be should have universal representation because again that's just going to be we had this conversation with no, what was it, the getting off the planets sim game where
Oh, Rimworld.
uh yeah where bi guys didn't exist
oh
and all of
yeah,
them were bi.
Yeah.
That
Rimworld.
one obviously you can't make one game representative of all of humanity, because then it would just be a perfect sim of real life, and it would have every person alive in it. I was more saying in a
Scope
broader
immediately.
context. Yeah, its scope is infinite. I was more saying in a broader context, if the one, black person in a game, in each game, is always a trope, or is often a trope, or like a high percentage of a particular category of folks, a particular demographic, is usually represented as a trope rather than not, rather than just as a character who is among that demographic as an individual, then it gets to be annoying. Like, I'm not offended by random random fuck white guy, because I've got 100,000 other white dudes who I can also go be represented by in games, and it's not a big deal. There's a sea of white characters, but there's a much smaller concentration of minority characters, and a much bigger. Basically, you tend to get the same number of tropes out of that smaller pool, and you end up with less characters as opposed to just tropes.
Yeah, and
it could be a better balance.
I would have to ask then, whose responsibility is it then to represent these characters? Because if we go to Japan, they have a very similar market to ours, where they have lots of movies, lots of comics, they have lots of video games. And so you end up with lots of comics, movies, and video games that are Japanese-centric. Same thing with China. China has a similar market. They have their own movies, they have their own visual media, and they have games. And so you'll end up with lots of Chinese-centric. Of course, between America, Europe, and lots of northern/western Asia, you have lots of white people and lots of different white cultures, and so you'll end up with predominantly white. In a lot of these white, or more of the Western nations, we have large concentrations of the black community, but the greatest density of black population doesn't have these markets like we do. You don't see lots of movies, lots of comics, lots of video games coming out of majority black countries. So I think in order for us to avoid relying on stereotypes like we would see in any of these other cultures portraying white people and black people, and I guess the Latin America, they're catching up. They've got some games that have come out recently, so they've been kind of doing their own thing. But I feel the same way about them as black people. They just kind of end up as a stereotype too. But is it our responsibility to say, we're going to try to represent you? Because then I think you start falling into that cultural appropriation thing, where people will just be like, oh, look, you're selling their culture. Oh, look, you're profiting off their culture. Because I feel like that's a lose-lose. Like, we need to, if we want to, create that kind of diversity in the market as a whole. Like, if we're not looking at individual games, we're looking at franchises or at the entire thing, we're going to have to basically bring capitalism to these poor places and be like, hey, you guys need to make more movies and comics and video games and stuff in order to build that up, because that's the only way it's going to be true. It's going to come from their heart, and they'll tell the story they want to tell with the characters they want to do. And I've seen like a couple of those videos that made it to YouTube of like people trying to have like Bollywood, but the like Nigerian version, where they'll have like a toy helicopter and try to use perspective to show people running to it and then flying away. Like, they're trying, but you've got some really low production value. You gotta work with it. If that's the case, if we can like get them their own tools so they can build their own stuff, I think that would solve the problem. And any other way you try to solve this, somebody's going to get upset about it. And I don't think there's a perfect way to do it. You might be able to just be like, okay, we've got this studio, let's invite a whole bunch of people that want to be game developers, and we'll bring them over here. They can study abroad for like a year or two and work on a game, and then maybe we can just facilitate that. I think that'd be a good jump start to it, but I'm not exactly sure if that's sustainable or not.
Yeah, and one of the problems with getting more diversity in gaming is that there is a low representation of people of color excuse me, in STEM fields. There's a low population in programming and in everything that makes video games. There's a low population of just people of color in that field, and so it's a problem of there being honestly a wage divide. Like there's a certain barrier of entry to get into the field, and that barrier has lessened since since we went to UAT. You don't need to go to UAT to do game design. You can get the Unreal Engine for free and use that. You can get Maya and
Hmm.
Max for really cheap and get or pirate it if you want to. They don't honestly care because eventually if you get
You know,
really good, you're going to be in the industry that will be buying the program that you will be using anyway, so they're getting their money on the back end. Um, but the problem is just the barrier entry is still too high, and I don't have a solution for it. I mean, like like you were suggesting, maybe invite people from the inner city and say, hey, if you want to do this, here's what you can do. We'll take you through like maybe a tutorial or this 8 week course or whatever. And if you really want to do it, you can then pursue it. Maybe that's an option. I don't know, but at some
I
point,
think I think that gets back to like poverty in general
yeah,
because
yeah,
yeah, it's
I mean like
systemic.
you're gonna find the same problem with any person of any background not being able to get into STEM fields if they didn't have the education, they
hmm,
didn't have the support in order to help get them there. It's just that a large portion of the African American community lives
yep,
in poverty.
hmm,
And until we can solve the poverty problem, a lot of racial discrepancies in America are going to continue to exist, regardless of how much affirmative action you try to pump into it,
yeah,
regardless of how
Yeah,
many programs you try to outreach, because it's it's kind of like a band-aid. You're not solving the problem, you're just trying to like sugarcoat it a little bit,
yeah.
and maybe those couple of people that get to have that taste and be like, oh look, they lifted me up and helped me do this one thing, that'd be great. And I don't want to turn that around, like I don't want to say no to that,
Yeah,
but I'm aware that it's not sustainable. What we
yeah,
need to do
yeah,
is fix the underlying problem,
yeah.
and then you would see a lot
Eh,
more in the other
yeah.
direction.
I'll
I
get
was
back.
gonna say,
Mm, go for it.
I was gonna say one quick comment on the other countries not being developed enough to get into the game industry because it's a very privileged thing to have is a game industry.
Hmm.
Um, but as of like 4 or 5 years ago, I think I can't be bothered to look up information right now, but as of at least a few years ago, there are more non-white people in America than white people. So white people are still the biggest single demographic, but they're more than half of America is non-white.
Hmm.
But way more than half of the game industry is white. So that's still disproportionate, and we've got a lot of folks in this country who are of many different backgrounds who could tell the story, their stories and the stories of their culture they came from,
Hmm.
if they had the opportunity to do so. Again, it's systemic. We're a podcast on the internet, so we're not gonna fix income inequality here in the next hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um.
Uh,
So there.
there's that's
Yeah. Let's not go there for now. So there's another point I wanted to bring up about what she was talking about. She mentioned games that recognize cultural background, and she gave them like an A plus. I'm like, yay, good job. One of them was Mafia. One of them was Mafia 3. It's a game set in the 1960s where, by default, racial tensions were high. And it's set in like Louisiana, so double, the racial tensions. Um, and she congratulated the game for uh, showing the racial background of the main character and some of the side characters. And I was like, okay, fine, it's part of the story. I get it. Whatever. Okay. Then she mentions Watch Dogs 2, and I was like, Watch Dogs 2 really didn't go into Marcus being black explicitly. I mentioned this earlier when I played the game. There were a few comments where he talks to another black guy who's also a hacker, and they're like, "Oh yeah, nice to meet another brother in here. You know that there's not a lot of us in here." And then the game continues. Like it doesn't
yeah,
rocket into statistics or something ham-fisted about it. It's just, yeah, there's not a lot of us in here.
the common.
Story goes on. Um, and and then this is to wrap around. She talks into games that don't recognize cultural background. She mentions Remember Me. Never played it. I can't really talk about it. But she talks about Alex in Half-Life 3. She's like, well, Alex, I can't remember if Alex was explicitly African American or Half-Life 2. Sorry, Half-Life 2.
yeah. unless you got some kind of future release that and you just upset a lot of people that you have Half-Life 3, you goddamn asshole. Share it with the world.
I just
Sorry.
upset all four of our listeners and viewers. Um, they I can't remember if they explicitly said if she was African American or what her race was, but you can definitely tell she was not white. Um, and Sarkeesian talks about how this was a problem, and I'm like, it's not really a problem because her race isn't important to the story. Like, who cares if
Oh,
she's
I
black?
thought she was saying it was a good example of them just having a black character and then just having them be a character, not having black be part of the character. I don't
I
know. She didn't spend much time on it, so I didn't get a distinct idea.
right
But
from
I thought it was a positive.
because it was mixed in with
Personally, I think
it
it's
was mixed
positive.
in with Remember Me because she was like, oh yeah, this character is
Okay.
black, but they don't go against her, in her background. Alex is black, but they don't
Okay.
go in her background. It's like, well, it's not important. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Um, it's important in Mafia because of the background, of the setting, of the story. That is important. So yes, expound on that. But you can replace Alex with any other race, and it would not have any bearing on the story of Half-Life 2. You can replace the race of Marcus in Watch Dogs 2, and there may be some minor differences, but the overall story is intact. That's like that's like arguing that uh, we need to go into Jordy being an African American in Starfleet. We need to go through Cisco being an African American in Starfleet. We need to go through Bernard from Westworld being an African American in the company he's in. No, you don't, because that's unimportant. He happens to be a black guy in the story. None of that matters. Like,
Okay.
why bring it up?
Yeah, I think that in cases like that where it's not some weird thing where, you know, you're just a person in a society where a portion of the society is black and you are black and that's it. End of discussion. I think that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually how it probably should be done with most of the characters.
Yeah.
There's no story there. Yeah, I don't think it's a negative thing. Or there's anything wrong with that. That is just a perfectly acceptable thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Did
It's
she
not really a
mention?
formula, but
Oh,
good.
did my sound come out?
Yeah, I can
You're
hear
good.
Yeah, I think it's coming out of my speakers now on top of my headphones for some reason. But
you.
did she mention San Andreas at all?
No,
didn't.
she didn't. See, that's another thing that bothers. She didn't mention San Andreas, and she didn't mention GTA 5, both of which are accurate representations of African Americans that aren't racist. But
Yeah,
but
like
she
I was gonna say, I was in the middle of growing up in racist USA in fucking West Virginia when I got that game, and of course while I'm playing it, I have to deal with my mom just being like, "Nah, I'll leave that to your imagination."
Yeah,
But
game like you'd expect.
like you run around, you do your gang stuff, and then when you try to get out of the gang, you have to like build up your whole life and rebuild your company and all of this stuff. And it's not like every mission is white people attack you or the police beat you up, but you always have that undercurrent there.
yeah.
You always have that, like, all of the black people you run into are a little bit harder, they're a little bit, they aren't as chipper. And then
Mhm.
every white person you run into is on a ridiculous level of the chipper scale, or they're like a ridiculous level of the like geeky nerdy guy or something like that,
Yeah.
or like the chic businessman.
Mhm.
And then you end up with the cop that's the main antagonist.
The one played by Samuel L.
Yeah, I can't think of his
I can't
name.
remember his name either.
Officer Tenpenny. Tenpenny.
Okay.
No, was that it?
Sure, let's go with that.
Ah,
Yeah.
someone's gonna beat me up for that. But then you have him. The main antagonist is a cop who's black, and you're black, and so ultimately, like, you never felt like it was a game that was designed around racial overtones because they never threw it in your face,
Mhm.
but you always experienced it throughout the entire gameplay. And there's it ended up being so good, even though people like ragged on it for being like, oh, straight out of Compton, look, I'm a black guy in a gang now instead of being in the mafia, so this is silly. But it was really good. It was a
Yeah.
really fucking good game. and anyone can go back and play it and enjoy it for what it does in that regard. And I feel like if she didn't even bring that up, that's kind of a shame because that's such a good game about like I don't want to necessarily say romanticizing the black community, but there's a lot of it there. I feel like it does kind of romanticize a lot of what it means to be in the black community, at least from the perspective of a white person growing up in Hicktown.
Yes.
And
Her video did center a lot on black women, and that was an example of black men.
That's true.
She did throw in several examples of black male characters done well because she didn't have, I guess, enough examples of good black women done well. Unfortunately, hit the bottom of the barrel on that one. But yes, that could have been thrown in there with those.
Yeah.
So,
let me see. I think there were two, just my overall thoughts on her video because we're approaching an hour here.
Okay.
She keeps making this point about tribal markings and tribal tattoos being insensitive and borderline racist. Again, I went to Google image, African tribes or whatever, and the paint or the mud or whatever they use for they have those markings. Like that's part of their culture.
Yeah.
That's part of their tribe. I can. It's not.
I don't think
it's
inherently wrong.
It's not inherently wrong.
Yeah, you can do wrong things with it.
Yes, but I don't think the examples she showed are doing wrong. I think that someone looked at Google search and say, okay, well, there are these markings. Now, if they went into more detail and like researched them, I don't know. But on the surface, I'm not insulted. I'm not mad because that's a thing in the real world. Like it goes back to my point. You do it. You can do it wrong and people get upset. You do it right and people get upset. Like there's no. That's fine. It's a thing in Africa. Like what else do you want?
I'll tie this point back into mine about objectifying people.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like the Chappelle Show?
Oh, I love the Chappelle Show.
How many of his skits were fucking racist?
A lot of them.
Did you ever feel he was hateful about it though?
No.
I think if you had Richard Spencer, that white nationalist, if you had him stand up and do any of Chappelle's jokes in the same way, same pitch, same setting, it would not be funny. You would probably not laugh. You'd probably look at it and be like, dude, this guy is fucking racist. But it's Chappelle. And in between the skits, he makes it so that you are comfortable. He also talks a lot about unity and coming together and, enjoying each other's company. And then throws out, like, fuck white people, though. And then, like those Asians at the counter store always saying, I'm trying to steal shit. Like, I think having context is what matters. And when you see that a developer is putting in fan service, I kind of don't care about it being representative of anything.
Right.
When we talk about like someone trying to sprinkle on a flavor of diversity by going like, yes, I want to have some Japanese culture. So you throw in some rising suns, some, katanas, and a couple samurais and some top knots. Boom, we got Japan. Like, okay, I could see that being bad, immoral if you're doing it to mock them.
Correct.
But if you're just doing it to have flavor or to have some diversity in there, I don't really feel like you should be upset. I think the context is what matters.
Yes,
if it was in post, same thing to compare Chappelle Show to this. Take any of the stereotypes that we just talked about between Shiva and I'm just gonna keep going back to her because we're thinking about loincloths and. But take anything that we just discussed and put it in Postal 2. That's that context. That game is a trolley game about just taking the piss out of everything. And if you start putting in those kind of flavors of diversity, it's to take the piss out of them. Mm-hmm. It's the context that matters. Yeah. So I think that's what's most important.
Mm-hmm. I'll just say, for me, my metaphor for this is it's the difference between me playing Cards Against Humanity with my friends out here from college, and me playing Cards Against Humanity with my family from Kansas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different experience.
Yeah. Um,
It's not quite as fun.
and I mentioned this before, but I want to say it again. The main argument she makes is objectification. That is the thrust. Okay, fine, I'm behind you. The fact that she throws race on top.
Yeah.
Oh, ha.
Behind you, thrust.
We're 8 years old. Um,
Objectifying.
um, I get it. Objectification is something we should have a conversation about. You don't need to throw race on top of that. That just convolutes everything, and then you have people, and then it becomes a distraction. Like uh, we should be talking about objectification of all women, not specifically women of color, because the moment you throw race on top of that, the assumption is that white women are fine, or white it's okay to objectify white women, for example. But and that's just as wrong as objectifying someone who's a person of color. Like they're both equally wrong. Drop the race part and let's talk about the greater picture here.
Yeah.
I'd say you could do this the same thing with exoticizing. That's why I said, like, if you go to Japan and
Yeah.
you look at how they perceive white people, that's pretty fucked up if that's how you actually perceive white people.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that we have our own culture where we can kind of just disseminate our own diverse opinion of ourselves. It's still fucked up that they would think that way.
Hmm.
And if you had a majority black population and they had the same kind of view of white people as that racial stereotype in Japan, that would be wrong. Saying like it's particularly bad because of its of one group or a minority group, I guess because of how pernicious it can be if you are a member of that group in that society, but I don't think it changes the morality of the action
Correct.
by the individual itself.
I agree. I
And
agree.
I think you can lose a lot of that whenever you start talking about trends and general culture. And I know that's what she's critiquing is culture, not a
Not,
single game or a single instance of
Yeah.
racism.
right.
But I think you can kind of get lost in between like being stuck at that individual level and being stuck at that macroscopic level,
Hmm.
because on both ends it doesn't fully work. You have to have some kind of like reason in the middle.
Yeah. I totally
Yeah.
agree. Any closing thoughts,
My,
Derek?
I was gonna say my closing thought, which I'll try and be concise with since we're running on, like we do. To touch base on the topic we've come back to a few times throughout this discussion, which is really the difficult thing to answer, the catch-22 of how do you do it right, when is it not wrong, um, whose responsibility is it? I would say the way to be a responsible creator, regardless of what you're doing, is to create consciously, with intent. Uh, you know what you're doing and do it on purpose. If you're gonna
Hmm.
choose to make a character a trope, do it on purpose. Say, yeah, I want to make them this trope for this reason. Don't just be like, and then there's a black guy and he's all loud and he likes chicken because that's how that is, and then move on. Be
Because
like,
that's
if that's
how it
just
is,
your
right?
default. Yeah, like if you just default to the trope and then stop thinking, like you should probably think about yourself a little bit for a while and deal with that issue. I'm wearing my DFTBA shirt, and I will, as I do as often as possible, quote John and Hank Green, say, my mantra for life I try to follow is imagine others complexly. If you imagine other people as complexly as you imagine yourself to be, it's really hard to be an outright asshole to them.
Right.
And it's really, really hard to be racist or sexist or anythingist, because you see them as an individual who is many layers just like you, because they are.
Yeah.
And that's how you should view. It's not necessarily how you should view every character, because again, some characters can be and sometimes should be tropes. Tropes are fun when they're used appropriately. It's like playing Cards Against Humanity and making a racist joke, because neither you nor anyone in the room is even vaguely racist, and that's why it's able to be funny. It's the Chappelle Show, not, the KKK meeting. There's a difference.
Yeah.
So, and you can have Bayonetta be running around in skin-tight, skimpy clothes and not be a sexual object.
Yes.
She's sexually empowered. That's the difference. Like, you can have the same outfit on a character and have it be one and the other, given the context. So just think about things. Be a responsible creator. Don't just, default to tropes. That's dangerous.
Yep. Awesome. I think that's a good place to go ahead and wrap it up. If you're listening to the audio podcast, I will put the link to the video we're talking about in the show notes. If you're watching us right now, the link will be in the description down below, down there somewhere. Yeah. And I think that's it, guys.